All right, thank you so much, everybody. Good, our sound's working. Excellent. All right, we got a little bit of time, and I got a lot of stuff to cover, and so let's get started. Let's talk story. So let's talk story. I'm going to talk about the technology of imagination. So I'm going to give you some tools and practices that I got from my experiences at Disney and beyond. This is a really tech-heavy space, and I'm going to do this analog. You see, I've got a piece of charcoal in my hand, an 80-year-old easel, and a piece of paper here to diagram in an analog way how we have the sort of technology of imagination. So if we talk story, let's go back to the beginning. Some 14 billion years ago, just before the Big Bang, right? That was the moment just before science started. And if you think about for a minute, what was it like before the Big Bang? And then suddenly, out of nowhere comes all of the energy and all of the matter that will ever be in an infinite universe across an eternity of time. And if you ask science how this happened, they say, and let me check my notes, we have no freaking idea. We don't know where it came from. We don't know what it is, why it's here, who made it, what it's for, what its purpose is, but it's here. And so if you grant us this one act of magic, then we can take it from there, right? And so that's kind of the famous thing. There's sort of this abracadabra moment, and then science gets started, and then they take it from there. All right, so let's jump forward another, say, 10 billion years when all of this debris starts congealing and connecting, and you have this massive burning star up in the sky, and all of these gaseous clouds and Oort clouds. And I don't know what an Oort is. I don't think anybody really knows what an Oort is, but there's clouds of them out there doing things. And then there's this planet that we're on right now. And about 4 billion years ago, there was this moment where what they call the last universal common ancestor emerged from some kind of moment of connection, a moment of emergence, right? So that was 4 billion years ago, life happened, right? I know this story goes back a while, but I'm going to catch us up here in a minute. The last unknown common ancestor. Now, there were a couple of others that happened first. Life that happened on Earth that didn't quite purchase. Those were the first ones, and those were the sorry Fucas who didn't make it. That's a joke on Luca, the last common. All right, anyway, so since that time, 4 billion years ago, there have been 100 million species on this planet. 100 million opportunities for life to emerge, to swim in these glorious oceans and to ramble along this beautiful earth. 100 million species. Now, right now, there's 10 million species on this planet. That means that 90% of all life that's ever tried to have purchase on this planet has gone extinct. 90%. And among those 100 million species, there's only one that has figured out the secret to reality. I mean, I think you guys can guess who it is. It's us, and it's because we tell stories. There's one species on this planet in 100 million that tells stories, and stories are how we craft reality. A story is a way to take an experience, codify it into knowledge. That knowledge becomes wisdom. That wisdom builds culture, and that culture engenders beliefs. And when we believe, that's how we create. So we've had this abracadabra moment when the Big Bang happened. We'd had another one when life emerged. And then there's this other one, this abracadabra moment that when we believe, we can create. And so let me share with you, I know that a lot of times we say, well, seeing is believing. But it's my invitation to all y'all that believing is actually seeing. That what we believe first allows for us to create. And you can see it inside of that grand hall out there, that all of the made things in your life are here because somebody believed that they were possible. So there's a story by the philosopher Stephen West that if you want to, it's my hair tie right here. It's a watercolor brush, so I keep losing my scrunchies. All right. Stephen West was a philosopher who shares this story that I think is really salient. He says, imagine yourself being chased by a ravenous bear. Now, you can't outrun the bear. And then ahead of you, you see a chasm that you can jump over and escape the clutches of the bear if you can jump over this chasm. Now, if you believe it's possible to clear that chasm and you make it, then belief is part of it. If you don't believe it's possible, then the opportunity for you to have a success will not exist. It doesn't become part of the equation, right? So belief in making it, and so let's say you jump and the positive outcome happens. That positive outcome was only accessible because belief was present, right? So belief becomes a non-trivial part of the creation of anything. And so that's why I think about this as a technology. It's not just something that you plug into the wall, right? We think about technologies as all of the stuff down there that's powered by electricity. A technology is really just tools, systems, and practices that allow you to have replicable results, to be able to count on a process that takes you from start to finish to turn a thought into a thing. So technology is this easel. A technology is just as much one of those eyeglasses as it is a piece of charcoal. In fact, a piece of charcoal was probably the first technology. So when I got to Disney, and I should mention that I was an animator at Disney Studios during what was called the golden age of animation. I worked on projects like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, kind of all of those during the 90s that are part of our cultural story right now. And when I got there, I got a lecture that for me made the difference between being an amateur and being a professional. And it's all about this idea of the technology of imagination, this ability to create using tools and practices that allow you to build on your practices and track a path to mastery. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today, is the things that I learned about what I call the universal laws of creativity. So I know that we've been just talking about the universe, and this is, you know, to say the universal laws of creativity might sound a little hubristic. Like, it's a big universe, and it's very old, and how can there just be universal laws of creativity? I'm going to share this with you, and you can, you know, you probably already know some of these. If there are more, I am open to hearing more. If there are less, let's knock one out. It's a universal law of creativity that I have found I use every day in the things that I do. And so let me invite you to just open your aperture a little bit to receive these. I'll tell you a little story. I was in this Psychic Eye bookshop a few years ago and just wandering around it, and I grabbed this book off the shelf called The Gift. It's a Daniel Lindinsky translation of Hafiz's poems from the 14th century. And if you don't know who Hafiz is, he's kind of like Rumi, but sexier and more real. And one of my favorite poets. Now, I'd never heard of him when I opened this book, and I flipped to a page, and the page said, "The universe knows only 4 words." And I thought, oh, come on, man, it's the universe. What are you kidding? It knows only 4 words. And I read on, it said, "The universe knows only 4 words, come dance with me." And I thought, oh, man, you know what? I am down with that. So I'm going to invite you to come dance with me as we look at these 5 universal laws of creativity, and imagine how I'm going to share with you these laws and then practices that I use, and then you can look for your own practices as you build on top of these. The idea here is to really give you something that you probably already know, but now I can hand you what for me was a hurricane glass that went over the flame of my creativity so that it would never go out. So I also want to define for you, I've used the term abracadabra. Now that, for us, as we grew up, is kind of gibberish. But actually, the Hebrew root of abracadabra means I create as I speak. Abracadabra was actually the first spell. It's incredibly powerful to think about. I create as I speak. My thoughts phase up into this vibration of my voice, and that's the beginning that lights the fuse for you to turn a thought into something real in the world. So, before I start on the universal laws, let me sort of explain kind of the systems that we're already in. So if you imagine, you're going to start here. Here's your thought down here. And then here's this thing out here in space that you're going to create. And you think, all right, cool. I'm going to make this thing, and here's my plan. I'm just going to go at it, right? And then what happens? life happens, right? And so you get started, and then you're kind of over here, and you're like, oh my God, I'm lost. I got to figure things out. The pizza guy shows up. You got to pay him in dimes. There's just distractions that are happening, right? And then you get back on track, and you shoot over here, and now you're overshooting, and your boss is like, hey, how's it going over there on that thing you're working on? And you're like, it's fine. Everything's good. You're on track? Totally on track. Then you end up like making something that sort of goes like this. Now the challenge with something like this, does this look familiar for how we create things? Yeah, right? Well, listen, it's not unusual. This is how I got to Disney, right? Like you can get good doing it this way. The challenges with this is that you get good almost accidentally. So how do you look at your own creative process so that it's not an accident, that you can actually stack every piece of learning on so that you can build this path to mastery, right? Because this gap right here, for us creatives, man, that is the abyss, right? That's the place where we land short of what we intended, and all of this self-talk and the recrimination and the blame and whose fault is this? There's a lot of challenges with this. Like, for example, it's really hard for me to believe that something like this is possible if I always land here, right? It's hard for me to communicate with my collaborators because I'm not totally sure where I am exactly in the process. And I can't use this as a technology to replicate and grow. So, is there another way to look at this? No. Thank you very much, everybody. No. There is. All right, so at Disney, we thought, could you look at your creativity differently? Could you imagine your creation with the same energies, the same spirit that the universe creates in, the same pull that drags that massive, glowing, flaming ball through space, the energies that drag a rose up from the ground and cause it to bloom, that shape a cactus when it grows? Could you embrace your creativity with the same energies that the universe uses? And if you did, you would have your thought start down here, your thing out here in space somewhere, space and time, whatever it is that you imagine, and you would approach it like this. Now, when I first saw that, I was like, oh shit. This might be another way to look at the world, right? And now this becomes the map for how you approach creativity, and it symbolizes, now it's a schematic, right? So it's not always going to be exactly like this, but it's a schematic that helps you imagine how it is you're going to unfold your creativity. And so we've already talked about the first universal law of creativity, that's belief, right? So if you start here, your first job is to believe that whatever this is totally possible, right? And so that's why I believe that this is a technology. So belief becomes that first practice. And inside of belief, well, it's the first law. And the practices inside of belief, and there's a multitude of practices on how to believe and get people to believe. But the best one is story. The best practice for being able to engender belief in yourself and others is telling a good story. So what are the practices for telling a good story? And there's a lot of them. But I want to invite you to think about the power of story as the means for getting people to believe. Now, if you're in marketing, I'll give you one more layer on it. You're going to have to imagine, you have to manage 4 different stories. So the first story is the story of the storyteller. Who is telling the story? How credible are they? If I told you that I just finished this film, Dave's Lion King, would you go see it? You'd be like, I mean, you 3 right there would go see it because these are my friends up here, right? But everybody else would be like, yeah, nah, I don't know, who's Dave, right? But Disney's Lion King, you'd go see. Why? You know nothing about the Lion King, but you know that those people at Disney are great storytellers, right? Patagonia, Salesforce, right? Ohana, these things that the story of the storyteller matters. That's where the credibility starts. So that's one story that you have to manage. The second story is, who are you telling the story to? Who is your, what they call ICP, your ideal customer profile, or your avatar, or just your customer? Who's the story you're telling it to? Who is that person? The third is, And this is the third, not the second. What's your product or service? What are you offering that's a benefit to somebody else? That's the third story. And the fourth story is what the customer says about you, what their story is about you. That's your reputation, right? And so the key is if you could have your reputation be the same story as the story of the storyteller, that closes that circuit, right? When your reputation is the same thing, those guys at Disney tell great stories, right? That closes that circuit. So understanding how story is empowering belief, that's the critical practice for the first universal law of creativity. All right, the second universal law of creativity, let me put these here. So one is believe. All right, two is iterate. Right? This is a model for iteration. You do things in passes. In fact, let me do a little demonstration on this. So, we think about things in agile. If there's engineers in here, you have your agile process, you have your iteration that's collaborative. But there's a framework under iteration that I think is really powerful that gets overlooked. It's not just about iteration, it's how do you iterate. And so the practice here is to be committed but not attached. So committed but not attached. One of my instructors says, you make a mark with the full force of your being, believing that it's exactly correct, knowing it's probably wrong, right? So let's say I'm going to do a drawing of a face here, right? And I'm just going to start with my first pass, and I'm just going to kind of like, make a little thing here. I don't know. Let's say it's a smiling person, and it's an anime character, so there's big hair, and there's like shoulders here. All right, so that's my first pass, okay? Now, here's the thing. I can draw, so I don't need to care about how accurate this first pass is. This is just me getting around that first part of the spiral, right? I'm just getting things down. So then my second pass is, I'm going to say, all right, so I'm going to light it from over here. So here's my lighting here. I'm going to have, let's see, shadow here, a little corner shape here, cast shadow. Down here, there's maybe a cheek in here. Here's shadow on the thing. Then I'm going to come in. All right, so that's second pass, okay? All right, so then I got to look at it, and one of the things that we do, that we did at Disney is in between each pass, you would stop and identify what needs to happen on this next pass. So you're not trying to solve the little things one at a time. People say the devil is in the details. It's not. The devil is in the details when you do the details too early, when you hit that center of the spiral before you've had a chance to go around it. Because there's a moment when you've done all of those things and you're in the center of the spiral where the divine is in the details, where every mark is like, oh, that's right? And so, if I'm going to take another pass, I'm going to come in and I'm going to start to identify some things in here. And I'm still pretty scribbly here. But I know that if I had a ton of passes, I just need enough passes to be able to get this to where my imagination wants to take it, right? So that's I don't know, somebody asked me, how do you know when you're done? There's a famous quote from Cézanne who says, it takes two people to finish a painting, the painter and somebody to tell him to knock it off. Right? So committed but not attached. I know that with multiple passes, I can get this to wherever I need it to go. And I can be patient with that process, and that's how I can build skills. I reject the things that don't work on this. Get in there a little bit. And keep the things that do work. Now, I've got a sketchbook that I carry everywhere I go. I've got thousands of sketchbooks. And people look at my sketchbooks and they go, wow, Dave, there's 50 amazing drawings in this sketchbook. And they don't know that that sketchbook came with 100 pages, right? So this is a way for you to keep the things that work and then keep moving past the things that don't. Committed but not attached, that is the attitude of the master. The third thing is that creators collaborate. I'll come back to this one someday and finish it. So The third universal law of creativity is that creators collaborate. And at Disney, we had this term called plussing. To plus something would be to be in service to the trajectory of the idea, not the ego that brought it. So to plus is to be able to say, to be additive. Now, there's lots of practices to be additive, things like yes and, for example, right? To be additive is to be able to be in service to both the mind and the heart of the creator, right? If you tell a creator that they suck, you're not going to get good work out of them. That's because their heart, their emotions are part of the creative process. And so to be able to take care of that, we discovered at Disney that to plus each other was a way to be able to accelerate the process. And plussing becomes a cultural piece. It's not just a practice. It's a way for your culture to build on itself. At Disney, we had this culture of plussing where there were permissions. Hey, can I plus this for you? Right? And so there's a space, and I found it really delightful in the animation industry where there was this space where we knew we were telling a story bigger than any of us. And because we were telling a big story, we were able to be generous with each other. And then when we were that way, we found that the fastest accelerant to being great at something was generous collaboration, right? That you want to be great at something, learn how to play nice. Learn how to share and be shared with. That's how you get great at something. I found that the most amazing artists were also the most generous. They never thought that if I take my candle and light yours with it, I'm going to have less flame. All right. So I also want to offer that this collaborative issue, this thing is in our blood. We are collaborative. We are symbiotic. You know, inside of our cells, there's a mitochondria. The mitochondria has now you guys remember from high school biology, right? Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? Its DNA is a different shape than the DNA for the rest of the cell, indicating it probably had a different origin, right? And so I imagine it was probably something like this. The mitochondria sidles up to the cell back in the time of Luca, the last unknown, the last universal common ancestor, before the Fucas, or after the Fucas. Anyway, mitochondria sidles up to the cell and says, hey, cell, what are you up to? And the cell says, man, I don't know. It's chaos. I don't live very long. It's a mess. I'm not really up to anything. Mitochondria says, yeah, hey, about that. I've been thinking. What are you thinking, says the cell. I'm thinking you and I get together, and then we can differentiate. We'll live longer. I can give you some energy. You could be a brain cell or a leg cell or a bone cell. It could be amazing. Like, you could even be a wing cell. And the cell goes, a wing cell, huh? Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. All right, let's do it. And so they do. And now we have all this mishigas, right? Right? Now we're here, okay? So I want to say that symbiosis, it's in your blood. So look for those people that you can collaborate with, because that is how magic happens. That's where the abracadabra comes in. All right, so the fourth universal law of creativity is risk. Right? Yeah, let's hear for risk out there. All right. You know, right? Like, it's not about mitigating risk or business risk. It's about risk as a creative. And you have to risk. Like, it has to be part. It's also where the juice is. It's also where the wow is. It's where the happy accidents are. It's where the mitochondria meets the cell. It's where, like, if you think about this kind of emergent property that happens when we risk a connection, you know, you can look at emergent properties as a phenomenon of life on Earth. Nobody would have thought, I can take this hydrogen atom and this oxygen atom, and somehow we're going to get wetness out of it, right? But water is prevalent everywhere as an emergent property. So risk offers us an opportunity to create things that we might not have seen otherwise. And one of the keys to risk is that one of the practices is play. Play is a great way to offer some opportunities for risk at low stakes levels so that you can build skills. I was watching these masters doubles men's tennis players, right? And one guy hit a shot that threw the other guy so far out of bounds to get it that his momentum took him and he ran onto the other side of the court. And the guy on the far side ran onto this side. And the next thing you know, these guys are playing around the world with each other and they're doing all of these trick shots and crazy things. And you can see that in this moment of play is where they had an opportunity to do things that they would never have done if the stakes were a little bit higher. So I would offer that if you want to if you want to play in the world of risk, you have to do it incrementally to build it, and you have to use play to be able to create an environment where risk becomes possible. And then you get to a point where you're like, hey, everybody, we're going to jump over here. You guys ready? And everybody is, right? And then that leads us to the last of the universal laws of creativity, and that is completion. That creators complete. They finish strong. Because when you finish strong, what happens is you close the circuit on your story of success. When you finish strong, that cycles you back up around to be able to tell a story that you and others can believe. So when you finish strong, you're able to now say, hey man, we did this, and we're gonna do this, right? So those are the 5 universal laws of creativity. I want to conclude this by sharing with you, kind of why we're talking about this. There's a philosopher called Joanna Macy, and she talks about what we call the Great Turning. The Great Turning is a period in history that there's a tumult, there's changes in culture, missions, mores, stories. And in that great turning, she has these 3 aspects to it. The first is a great unraveling. We're seeing a great unraveling, right? Like, not hard to imagine. There's been a political upheaval, the pandemic. We've unraveled a little bit. The second part of a great turning is the desire to return to a status quo. And we see that a lot also. Like, all of our leaders and politicians are pretty old. All of us are like, can we go back to what once was? Well, in science, you can't. It's what's called irreversibility, right? Time cannot go backwards. Chemical reactions can't go backwards. The story of culture in our world is irreversible. So then the third piece is what she calls the new story. So what's that new story going to be? I think that we're in the process right here of looking at what the new story is as it's emerging. And I would offer this, that there's an evolution in story. An evolution that's moving from the hero's journey, that place where you have a hero who reluctantly follows a calling and meets some old guy who sends him on a mission, and then he kills some bad guy and gets elixir from them and comes back to his garden. And what you have to know is you can't go back to the garden and just garden for you. That we've seen too much of the world, that we now have to create a community garden. And so this evolution of story is moving from what I call what's being called the hero's journey to what is now the kindred quest. That idea that you find your other kin, those other people who are on a similar mission, who see the world the same way that you do, who have similar values, and you take on something that's bigger than anything that you could have done alone. That kindred quest needs creativity. It needs you to understand how to track your path to mastery, how to build your skills to be great at what you do. This is how we solve the current challenges that we face right now. Now, we're in a time where stories have atomized each other. There's borders that we shouldn't cross, but we have to recognize that we are interdependent, that we all have our sovereignty, but all of our borders lean up against each other. And that you can leave a window open in Wuhan and the whole world knows about it, right? Like, we cannot be atomized anymore. So, knowing about our creativity is being able to manage growth, that our creativity matters, that we as storytellers, we have this 1 in 100 million species gift. And we need to use it right. Like, we can tell the post-apocalyptic stories and the stories of doom and gloom, man, those are easy. Those are low-hanging fruit. But can you flex your 1 in 100 million storytelling gift to tell the hard stories? And this is my provocation to you, especially when it comes to AI and all this new technology. The provocation is this: what if it went well, right? Can we tell that story? Can we use our storytelling skills to tell the story of what if it went well? That artists are compensated for the amalgamations that AI has, that our creations are able to find diplomatic solutions for formerly intractable problems. That we are the storytellers that have this magic, this create as we speak in our hands right now. And so that's why I wanted to share this with you, because we can change this current mythology of separation towards a mythology, a new story, a story of the kindred quest, a story where we know how to answer the question, what if it went well? And let me offer this one last thing. Like, what do you do in your life to make your creativity replicable? How do you use the tools in your life to be able to turn your thoughts into things with more and more predictability? And that, if I may borrow from Mary Oliver, what stories are you going to tell with this one wild and precious life? The stories of what if it went well. And so, as you speak, so too do you create. And that's the magic. That's the abracadabra. And so, let's go plus this place. All right, thank you very much.